Our first witness will be Mr. Gregory Kutz, who is currently the Managing Director of GAO's Forensic Audits and Special Investigation Unit. Mr. Kutz has testified and written investigative reports about federal government's handling of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, military pay problems, the Department of Defense, and smuggling of nuclear materials across our nation's borders, among other important issues. He is accompanied by Andy O'Connell, the Assistant Director of Investigations at GAO.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss residential programs for troubled youth. Last year I testified that negligent practices contributed to the death and abuse of troubled youth. Today's testimony responds to your request that we continue our work in this area. My testimony has two parts. First, I will discuss cases of death and abuse. Second, I will discuss industry marketing practices. I will also play excerpts from telephone calls we made to certain programs while posing as fictitious parents with troubled youth. First, we took an in-depth look at 8 cases of youth that died or were allegedly abused at private programs. It is important to note that we did not evaluate the benefits of these programs. In addition, the results of these case studies cannot be projected to all programs. For these cases, we found that untrained staff and ineffective management contributed to the death and abuse of youth. Human restraint also played a key role in several cases. The following examples will provide more detail. First, one group became lost and spent several additional hours hiking when the reported heat index outside was 120 degrees. A 14-year-old boy weighing 250 pounds had problems breathing but was encouraged by the staff to continue. When he returned to the camp, he collapsed against a tree and fell to the ground. Staff believed that he was faking it until he vomited, became unresponsive, and ultimately died. A 17-year-old male jumped off of a building in a suicide attempt and severely broke his left arm with the bone exposed. Despite this severe wound, the boy was punched, slammed against walls, and rolled in the dirt. He was beaten so severely that he forgot who he was and he became unconscious. These beatings continued for 2 weeks before he was finally given medical treatment. A 16-year-old boy having trouble breathing and walking was tortured and humiliated for days. One staff told the boy that he deserved an Academy Award for faking it. He died later that day. An autopsy report for this boy showed 71 contusions and abrasions from head to toe. Another 16-year-old boy with asthma was placed in a face-down restraint by 3 staff members before he died. Another boy was restrained more than 250 times, including 2 times for more than 12 hours each. A 12-year-old boy weighing 87 pounds was placed in a face-down restraint with a staff lying on top of him until he died. And a staffer referred to as the drill instructor trained his pit bull to bite people in the crotch on command. A 17-year-old boy experienced this painful abuse. Other kids in these and other programs also experienced disturbing abuse. For example, boys at one boot camp were required to stand with bags over their head and a hangman's noose around their neck. The rope on this noose was tightened to simulate a hanging. The individual responsible for this told officers that this was an appropriate form of discipline. Another boy was forced to lie face down on a red anthill and was not allowed to brush the ants off of his face or his body. In a separate incident, this boy was required to lie on his stomach for 10 hours. He was only allowed to get up to vomit, and then he was required to clean up his vomit before he got down on the ground again. And finally, the poster board shows the picture of a horse in Canada. This horse was starved, as you can see, by the protruding rib cage. Neglect also resulted in the problems with the hoof that you see on the picture. You're probably wondering what this has to do with today's hearing. Here's the interesting answer to that question. This horse belonged to the owner of one of our case study programs. This owner was convicted in Canada for cruelty to 39 horses and 7 golden retrievers. Although he received a lifetime ban from taking care of animals in Canada, he was allowed to take care of teenagers here in the United States. And the results should not be surprising. He and his wife were cited in Utah for, among many things, use of profane language to humiliate youth, improper seclusion, and rat infestation. Let me move on to my second point of my testimony here. Posing as fictitious parents with troubled teenagers, we called a number of programs and referral services to see what they would tell us. What we found were examples of deceptive and other questionable marketing practices. Let me describe a few of these cases for you. First, one program told our fictitious parent that they must apply to have their child admitted to the program. Although we never actually applied, the poster board on my right shows that our fictitious child, Devin, was approved for admission to this program. One fictitious parent was also told that membership in a trade association was like a good housekeeping seal of approval. One program went so far as to tell us that site inspections were performed by this association. The reality is that this association simply collects dues but does no due diligence of any programs. And one referral service told our fictitious parent that the boot camp they recommended feeds the child a whole grain diet, and that along with exercise and rest, and I quote, the bipolar, the depression, those kinds of things, they just go away after a while. Our fictitious parents heard other deceptive and questionable information during our undercover calls, issues related to taxes, reimbursement of health insurance, and education provided. One explanation for these shady marketing practices relates back to the root cause of many problems: money. These programs aren't cheap. Costs for the programs that we called ranged from $2,800 per month to over $13,000 per month. In conclusion, we as a country judge other countries harshly for their human rights violations. Yet at the same time, we found torture and abuse of youth across the United States. I can't tell you how widespread this problem is, but if the only horror stories are the ones that I have described for you, then isn't that enough? Mr. Chairman, I want to commend you for your continued oversight of this matter. We support the committee's efforts to put a framework of oversight and control in place over these programs. Although the youth we're talking about today are troubled, that shouldn't be an excuse for anybody to torture and abuse them.